Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. Do subscribe and become a channel member if you want to keep up to date with my coverage of this absolutely crazy decade. Because today we are going through a subject that is somewhat my area, and the first thing I'm going to go through is basically entirely pointless, so we are just going to skim through it. Because Labour have announced a UK-wide industrial strategy, and The Guardian thankfully go through the key points. But as I say, most of it isn't worth the paper it's written on, because none of this can really be implemented, because they are too wedded to other policy that is effectively killing the entire sector, despite what the monthly numbers in May said. So apparently there's going to be a more muscular approach to government under Labour, according to new industrial strategy that portrays the world as more volatile but also full of opportunity for British business. Well, that is typically how chaos works. This, of course, in the same week where the Labour government is openly talking about rebellion from the backbench MPs and no confidence motions, as much as Keir Starmer is trying to quell those rumours. So yeah, there's no way there's going to be a muscular strategy here. So this strategy was published on Monday, contained a range of policy measures ranging from lower energy prices, okay, to speeding up drug approvals, okay. One of the most important messages in the strategy is that the government will focus on accelerating growth for the fastest growing third of the economy. Okay, let's go into the detail. So first things first, cutting energy costs. To be fair, at least they've got the priority right. Energy costs are a massive one, as we'll get into. The centrepiece of the industrial strategy is reducing energy costs for big electricity users, although not immediately. Why not for all energy users? You can cut it all down just by going nuclear and fracking. Drill, baby, drill. Action to cut energy costs has been a key request from the industry for years. For years. Tories as well, by the way. I'm not just blaming Labour for this, and I'm kind of fed up of only blaming Labour for it. Tories to lend the rest, probably more important than Labour, to be honest. Labour only managed to win because Tories do not act like a centre-right party. That's the only time Labour win. Unless, of course, they've got direct communists in charge. The government said that it would introduce a British industrial competitiveness scheme from 2027, to reduce electricity cost for 7,000 businesses that use electricity intensively. Companies in manufacturing sectors such as automotive, aerospace and chemicals will be exempt from paying for the renewable obligation, feed-in tariffs and the capacity market. Those policy costs were imposed to pay for green energy programmes, but the industry has long argued that they put British business at a disadvantage to the competitors. Incredible. Absolutely horrendous policy. Not only while they are having a priority for pushing net zero, they're actually going to get rid of one of the main contributors to it, who are the people that actually use electricity. Instead of getting off net zero, what they are doing instead is reducing tax intake from big businesses, while at the same time people like you and me at home are having to pay for the subsidy on our energy bill. And guess what? To pay for all the net zero stuff, that's going to have to go up. I wouldn't mind this if all net zero garbage and green tariffs and stuff like that were reduced for everyone, but they're not. It's just for big businesses, and so you're going to have to pick up the tab on that, inevitably. Honestly, this budget in in autumn is going to be absolutely dire. These industries will also receive 90% discount, up from 60% for other policy costs that helped fund the electricity network. The government said that the network charging compensation scheme will cut costs for about 500 businesses from 2026. Effectively, yes, this is a rather large tax cut for businesses, which again, I don't mind seeing. The problem is that it should just apply to everyone. They're effectively having to, via tax cuts, subsidise these big businesses, when in reality there should be absolutely no need for that, because they should be that successful. Instead of bringing down energy costs for basically everybody, they're making tax cuts here while at the same time still charging what was supposed to be a temporary windfall tax on oil and gas companies and keeping that at 75%. You could just cut that and it would probably have the same effect, but it would affect everyone. That would obviously be a better cost-cutting exercise, but they are rabidly pro-net zero. Next couple of points, speeding up grid connections. I probably don't have much issue with this. Energy costs are not an issue for companies that cannot even connect to the grid in the first place for factories, energy generation or housing. To reduce the queuing time, a new connections accelerator service launched by the end of the year will act as a concierge for projects that could create jobs or speed economic growth. The government will add new powers to change regulatory process to make it easier for strategically important projects to get connected. In other words, probably more pylons. I will say, big criticism of reform, They seem to be instinctively anti-pylon. They keep saying that they can put them underground, but I don't think they fully understand the costs and what that actually implicates. So hopefully they get an energy policy expert on that case. I'm up for hire, by the way, if you want to hire me, Reform. Increase exports. The government wants to be seen as a free trade champion, even as the US turns to protectionism. It's highlighted talks on trade agreements with the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, South Korea, Switzerland and Turkey, aligning industrial strategy with Japan, and looking at ways to deepen cooperation with France and Germany. I'm fine with all this. Overseas investment support will focus on the IS-8 companies, and ambassadors in key markets will be tasked with drawing up plans to help those sectors. Again, all sounds good to me, but do not overcome the massive issues that basically every company in the industry is complaining about, which of course is massive energy prices, or will help you for big businesses. More state and corporation parallel interests there. Back in the day we used to call that fascism, but there we go. And of course taxes being far too high. Well, they're not touching them because they can't. Last 3 points, defence tech. The government has already committed to increasing defence spending. It's going up to 5% now apparently. God knows how they're going to afford that. Making it an attractive source of funding for British industry in straitened times. Yeah. At least 10% of the Ministry of Defence equipment budget will go on novel technologies such as drones and AI. To that end, the UK Defence Innovation, a body announced in March, will get a budget of £400 million. Well, that's not going to make Matt Ridley happy. You do not get innovation via boards or via public bodies. Generally, it's when you have an awful lot of competition, typically within the free market, or when obviously you are up against other countries, as in the space race. But I suppose if it's going to be outsourcing most of the actual innovation, it probably won't be that bad. The government will also provide the National Security Strategic Investment Fund up to £330 million by 2030 to invest in companies that can help the UK national security, while the existing National Wealth Fund will be directed to consider military investments. I keep forgetting, we supposedly have a National Wealth Fund, but I have no idea how it actually works or what money's in it. Originally it was going to be largely from energy innovations and technology, net zero stuff, but that doesn't make money, so God knows where they're getting the money from. Equity stakes in promising startups. At this month's spending review, the government committed to another $4 billion to the British Business Bank, which supports small and mid-sized UK companies, and took the total capacity to $25.6 billion. The BBB will be allowed to take equity stakes for the first time of up to $60 million, which could give the government big direct economic returns if startups become highly valued billion-dollar unicorns. And if they don't, you just lose $60 million. But anyway, that's a risk for all investment banks anyway. Don't think I'm too bothered about that, but I mean, I'd obviously rather it just be all private sector, but you're never going to get that, so I suppose this is the next best thing. Finally, quicker medicines and open health data. The government will aim to cut delays to medical trials and streamline drug approval processes at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency to try to accelerate development of new treatments and make it more attractive for companies to invest in the UK. NHS procurement of medical technology will also be accelerated. That's all fine to me. Honestly, I'm basically in the mindset that anyone should be able to volunteer for clinical trials and things like that, but there is a massive regulatory process, which makes sense because you don't want an awful lot of data saying you've killed patients who are on clinical trials, but at the same time, risk and reward. But according to The Guardian, there is still some things that are missing. There is still a more detail to come on various important sectors, notably sector plans for the life sciences and financial services. Okay, well that's not industry. Plus a whole separate defence industrial strategy that has not yet been published. Well, that makes sense because they only just announced that they need a hell of a lot more money for that. Ministers have also promised a trade strategy and a resilient strategy, clean energy workforce strategy, a load of other strategies that were out of the scope as this one, so what are you talking about, Guardian? Now, apparently the government also is relying on other policies to provide benefits for the British businesses, eventually. Monday's industrial strategy did not offer any new policies to reduce wholesale energy bills. Yep, by far the most important determinant of overall costs, so even the Guardian understand that, which is incredible. In the long term, the government hopes that increased renewable electricity supplies will lead to much lower prices. Well, I'm going to get into that eventually, but first let's look at what closing industries actually have to say about the state of the economy. So over in Stoke, as I have talked about before, there were 3 closures of major pottery businesses that have been going for more than 100 years, and it was so bad that even the council had to come out with a statement, as calls for support for the ceramics industry have been renewed after a third pottery firm collapsed in as many months. Burslem-based Moorcroft have today announced that they are being placed into liquidation. This was back in May, after more than 100 years. A firm that can trace its roots back to 1897 and has been based at its current site in Sandbach Road since 1913. The shock news came after Royal Stafford in Burslem and Newstead-based Heraldric Pottery entered liquidation in February, while Portmeirion announced a fresh wave of redundancies. Now Stoke-on-Trent City Council has pledged to continue to lobby the government for extra support for manufacturers hit by rising energy costs and cheap foreign imports. Again, I'm a free marketer through and through. I don't expect businesses to last forever. However, when there is obvious direct government policy issues that have caused this, then it's not just the free market will do as it will, it's, the government's getting in the way and ruining everyone's lives again. They can compete with cheap foreign imports because what they made was of good quality, and I think one of these was even the Queen's favourite pottery business. So clearly they were very good at what they did, and people will pay high prices for qualities, but obviously not this high, because the energy prices are just going through the roof. Anyway, the council say that they are going to be lobbying for lower energy prices, apparently, and to do something about illegal forgeries from overseas, which I don't know how you make illegal pottery, but there we go. Anyway, well, the council say that they will continue lobbying a government that is completely inept and doesn't want to do anything to actually help these companies, because they do not count as the large energy intensive ones like they were saying before. They don't care about pottery. Moorcroft said in a statement, "It is with deep sadness that the board of directors announced the closure of W. Moorcroft Limited with immediate effect. The closure comes after an extended period of intense marketing, which regrettably did not result in a buyer who could proceed with sufficient levels of investment. The company faced an increase in energy and other costs in a difficult trading environment with a global cost of living crisis. This has resulted in seemingly unsustainable financial position. The closure of the business has resulted in the redundancy of 57 employees, some of whom are being supported by the GMB union. At first reported at the end of February, staff were notified of potential redundancy and have now been made aware of the procedure for making redundancy claims." But I'm more interested in the bit above. Why are we closing? Because there is a global cost of living crisis. Okay, fair enough, it is global, but Britain is being affected by it quite largely, with other countries as well, but it's not a good thing. Previous policies have not exactly done much to try and stifle that. It's a difficult trading environment, okay, tariffs coming up, things like that, people are less willing to buy luxuries like this luxury pottery, but the big one, obviously, increase energy and other costs, the other costs, of course, being hiring people because of the national insurance contribution. Why am I making that assumption? Because every other company complains about it too. And as I say, every time I do a video on the economy, I will always get some comment effectively saying, yeah, it was cited to me that the national insurance contribution went up and therefore I was made redundant. Or it was cheaper to hire someone over in India, things like that. Not great, but yet here we are. The funny thing is that the advice being given to these companies is effectively, well, just look at new technologies. The industry is on its knees. Science consultancy firms effectively went over saying, don't keep it a museum. You can sell ceramics for components in mobile phones, aircraft engines and things like that. But the thing is, you go further down and, well, these firms are trying to use green energy. Hydrogen-powered kilns for the green burn. They've had to move from coal energy to natural gas, I imagine because of the net zero contribution, but now they've switched to electricity. That's more expensive than ever. When they call for support for the ceramics industry in the UK, they don't really mean subsidise us. They mean just let us burn coal again, for God's sake, or at least natural gas, because it's cheaper. And we've got plenty of it still waiting in the ground in the English Channel, in the North Sea, even in shale throughout the country, but the government has simply not let us do it, despite the fact the Tories kept promising it. Oh, that's very right-wing, then never did it. And this is just pointed out further down in the article. As Robert Flello, Chief Executive of Ceramics UK, said, the industry faced the pressure of going greener. Organisations members continue to invest in new plant and machinery to reduce their carbon footprint. In other words, when they say, oh, look to the future, they mean follow all of this policy you have to follow that makes your business impossible to run. How is this fair? It's no wonder we are going down the tubes as a country. The Tories put in net zero plans that killed most business, or at least massively constrained their productivity, and now Labour want to put that on steroids. With the right support from the government, the UK ceramics, which is highly respectable at home and internationally, can continue to thrive and grow. The Department for Business and Trade, a spokeswoman said, ministers continue to engage closely with the ceramic sector to understand the challenges and provide support, ensuring the industry is globally competitive and part of a plan for change. Not at all in this plan for strategy, though, this industrial strategy, though, at all. In fact, the beneficiaries are just companies that are bigger than them, despite the fact that all ceramics have done here is follow the letter of the law, and they're getting punished for it. Absolutely disaster governments. Successively for 2 decades, I would add. Anyway, next up, obviously, it's steel. British steel production is to be designated as critical to the UK's national security. Why it wasn't already is beyond me. Under plans to secure billions of pounds of orders from new wind farms, oh god, rail links and other infrastructure projects. Wind farms, honestly. We're getting into that last, because it is embarrassing what is happening with wind farms. So in an attempt to prop up domestic production, ministers are drawing up new rules that would allow public bodies to buy British steel, even if cheaper alternatives are available from abroad. Thank you, Reform, for suggesting this particular policy. It is designed to help industry which is facing an unprecedented crisis because of the President Trump's trade tariffs. Alright. Industry sources have warned that steel prices in the UK have fallen by as much as 10% because of foreign steel exporters having diverted products that had been destined for the US to other markets. They warn the situation is likely to become critical next month when the European Union clamps down on steel imports to shield its domestic industry from global oversupply and falling prices. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do understand that Trump's tariffs have had a big effect on this. The reason I go alright is because, again, every time there is a steel shutdown, it's, oh, cost of running it's too high, this is because of energy prices, obviously. NIC is somewhat involved as well. Basically, the reason we can't have industry here is because of net zero, and it's got to a point where the industrial strategy to compensate for that is effectively give them a load of tax cuts that's supposed to pay for the net zero stuff we're still going to do. Absolutely crazy set of priorities. Again, just to make clear how crazy what the government is doing are, you could just fix pretty much all of these problems by stopping net zero and drilling up oil and gas in the interim, while you then focus on trying to get nuclear sites built everywhere. They're kind of doing the nuclear thing, as we'll get into, but they are astronomically and ridiculously opposed to any oil and gas being extracted. Oh, because we need to keep the carbon footprint down. Well, we've managed it, we've halved it, what have we got to show for it? Every industry failing. Great. And again, this is just stuff you keep hearing from Wales Online in April. Hundreds of jobs set to be lost as a chemical giant's Welsh factory is set to close. US company Dow has confirmed to the union Unite that it is closing down an area of its plant in Barry Vale of Glamorgan. Unite say there are almost 300 jobs at risk due to its closure. The company has operated from the Barry site since 1971 when it brought the site from the Midland Silicons, and now employs 850 people on an 160-acre site. The closure of the part of the plant means that the job losses could affect a third of the workforce. Great. Can you please let us know why? So the company issued a statement in which they said they needed to make $1 billion in cost savings in response to uncertainty in the wider economy. They were expected to achieve this through a $500 million to $700 million reduction in direct costs, primarily focused on purchaser services and third-party contract labour, and decreased labour costs, including through a workforce reduction of approximately 1,500 Dow roles globally. Spokesperson for Dow said, as part of Dow's assessment of its European assets, the company has identified the basic siloxanes operation at Barry, UK, among other upstream portions of Dow's portfolio that will require further action. The potential outcome identified of this for Dow's basic silicates operations in Barry is a shutdown, just completely shutting down the area because it costs too much to run, again, usually down to labour and energy costs. Why do I say that? Because every single other industry is saying that. Let's move over to the chemical industry that's taking a hit. We used to be world leading here. UK's largest bioethanol manufacturing plant will close in the next few weeks if it does not receive financial support from the government. Its operators have threatened putting 160 jobs at risk. Vivergo Fuels, the bioethanol producer wholly owned by Associated British Foods, warned suppliers in a letter published on its website this week that the plant will close if there is no government intervention. Apparently there were a series of decisions made that undercut UK ethanol production in favour of US imports. The deal will offer US ethanol producers 1.4 billion litres worth of tariff-free exports to the UK instead of the existing 19% duty, equivalent to the UK's entire annual demand for the chemical. Incredible. So on top of energy costs and all things like this American deal has actually made UK businesses suffer because we did not get a reciprocal tariff back. Effectively, you have some free trade with the US on certain exports from the US. That included ethanol production, which obviously we're quite world leading on. And the government decided to give 1.4 billion litres worth of tariff-free exports to the UK from the US, which is the entire UK demand. So we're just going to buy all ethanol from the US and force our own production to close. Incredible scenes. If it's not the two main things, amazingly, which is obviously the NIC and the energy costs, it's the government doing their best to look good on the world stage with their trade deals, which, okay, it was never going to be good. I don't think you needed to have our entire chemical industry undercut with this trade deal, though. But you did, so well done. Just this week, Saudi Aramco-owned SABIC said on Wednesday that it had decided to shut the Olefin 6 cracker facility in Teesside permanently following review of competitiveness. Comes after the company had paused a major conversion of the plant to run on gas feedstock, sparking speculation that the bosses were on the verge of announcing its closure. This puts 300 jobs at risk and underscores the strain faced by Britain's chemical industry as a result of crippling energy prices and a tough global market. Yep, once again, those two things cited constantly. But at this point you get the idea. Lots of places closing down. Plenty of reason for that is the energy prices. Some of the reason for that is the national insurance contribution. Another large reason, of course, is the global market as it stands, especially with Trump's tariffs. But now I think we need to look at, once again, net zero, because as far as I'm concerned, wind farms and net zero in general needs to just die. Because according to the director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford, Scotland's newest wind farm, Moray West, became fully operational at the end of April, and data for May is now available. Scandalously, it's being paid to switch off more than it is actually generating power. As you can see from the graph there, you're getting about 58% on time for Seagreen, but you are getting, God, what's that, about 36% maybe uptime from Moray West. Just that is a disaster. We are paying companies to turn off their wind turbines more than they generate power in their first month. That is pretty bad. And this is the only way, by the way, you can actually get wind turbine companies to even exist. You have to pay them while it's off. Basically, it's compensation, because this isn't because there's no wind, by the way. This is because there is too much wind. If you have too much wind and it generates too much power, you effectively melt the wires. So it could be a capacity issue as well, but that costs even more money than it would cost just to obviously have nuclear power stations built over the past 12 years, or even quicker, just drill for some more oil while you do that. He goes on to say it was the same story for Seagreen, the last Scottish offshore wind farm to open. Another large Scottish wind farm called NNG is coming on stream over the coming months, and so this is all going to get very expensive. Just to get quite clear on how expensive it is to turn off a wind farm, according to the BBC, the way the system currently works means that a company like Ocean Wind gets what are effectively compensation payments if the system can't take the power its wind turbines are generating and has to turn down its output. It means Ocean Winds was paid £72,000 not to generate power from its wind farms in the Moray Firth during the half-hour period on the 3rd of June because the system was overloaded. One of a number of occasions, output was restricted that day. So £72,000 to turn it off for half an hour. And that happened multiple times that day. Imagine how much that was happening over May, given that over May it was being paid to switch off something like 63% of the time, 64%. Who knows? But this is actually a bit of a doubled up cost, because at the same time, 44 miles away, east of London, the Grain gas-fired power station on the Thames Estuary was paid £43,000 to provide more electricity. So it doubles up your cost. You have to pay compensation while you cannot get electricity from overloaded wind farms, and then you have to pay gas companies to keep the grid going. This is how net zero works. It basically doubles up your bill because you're having to subsidise the wind farms to be made in the first place. They last about 40 years. They never actually save more CO2 than they produce to make the damn thing. And then you have to put more CO2 in the air anyway when it's not working. Because at the end of the day, people still want power. Okay, great, wind and solar, they're good when the sun shines and the wind blows. But quite clearly, it's costing a hell of a lot more when those two things aren't happening. Or if the wind is going to blow too much. Gets worse, by the way. Payments like this happen virtually every day. Seagreen, Scotland's largest wind farm, was paid $65 million last year to restrict its output 71% of the time, according to analysis by Octopus Energy. Just incredible. That is money that could have been put on a nuclear power plant, by the way, but they didn't do that. They went wind farms instead. Colossal waste of money. Anyway, luckily reality is clearly hitting Labour straight in the face, because Ed Miliband finally does something that I don't have a problem with. As it was announced today, he is to pump billions of pounds into nuclear power renaissance to keep Britain's lights on. The Energy Secretary will on Tuesday commit £14.2 billion to building 2 giant reactors at Sizewell, Suffolk, capable of providing 6 million homes with electricity regardless of low wind and dark winter days. The heavy investment comes as fears rise that Mr Miliband's rush to build wind and solar farms is leaving the grid too exposed to the weather and vulnerable to outages. Well, that's clearly happening. Over-reliance on intermittent renewables could even threaten blackouts, the kind that hit Spain in April, say experts. Duh. I do love that. When I made my video on Spain going into a blackout because of net zero, I had all sorts of comments saying, oh, you can't blame net zero for this or that or the other. Well, the experts are saying it now, so apparently I was just ahead of them. Nuclear generation is a reliable source of so-called baseload power, the minimum amount of demand on the grid. Perfect. Writing in the Telegraph, Mr Miliband said the announcement marked a new golden age for the British nuclear industry. Well, that's good. It's a shame you're against it for 20 years, but as I say, reality hits you like a ton of bricks. So this is good, but it's far too late, and as I say, the way to fund it is to frack and drill the North Sea. Are they going to do that? Well, there was actually word or rumour that they'd have to go back on that when they cancelled all the licences, so we will have to see. Anyway, with that, I think I have had enough of a rant for today. You all get the idea. It's all terrible in the industrial sector. Luckily, you can typically fix these sorts of things basically overnight with good policy. Basically overnight, meaning in a couple of months. And it is policy that largely Reform are looking good with. At least they were against net zero. However, I wish Richard Tice would not be against pylons as much as he is, but, to be honest with you, the savings you're probably going to make from net zero, you can probably subsidise underground wires to replace pylons, but, well, I think the environmental type people will have something to say about that, won't they? Anyway, with that, it's everything I had for you for today. So, once again, please do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, great ways to help out the channel. Do donate via becoming a member or sending super chats, super thanks, they really do help out the channel. In terms of what's coming up, Subnautica tonight, Laughing at the Guardian Saturday, videos out as and when I can make them, and that's pretty much it. Right, with that, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.